Hey everyone, I'm Matt. I'm a professional baker, and I'm going to tell you how to make bread if you're cheap and lazy, like me. So, this is my recipe of bread that I use all the time. I make pizza dough with it, I make rolls with it, I make just loaves of bread with it whenever I feel like it. I've been making bread like this for about 3 years, maybe four, as a single man living in an apartment, so I know it works if you're cheap and lazy. And without any further ado, I'm going to get into the software. But first, I want to give you a little disclaimer. I tend to do this in weight because that's what bakers do. It makes it easier for us to do our nerd math. But I have converted it into imperial dry measurements for you. I can also, in the description, there's going to be imperial weight measurements if you have a scale that doesn't do metric. So first you get 450 grams or 3 cups of bread flour. Now bread flour, if we're being honest, might be that and yeast are probably going to be the only things that you have to buy if you want to make this bread. So that goes into the cheap factor. It really doesn't matter what brand you use. You can literally buy Walmart bread flour. I've done that and had delicious bread. Then you're going to want about a cup and an eighth, or 270 grams of tepid water. You can do that just by running your tap hot. It doesn't have to be microwaved or anything. 1 packet or 7 grams of yeast. I recommend you just pick up a packet. I'm going to have a picture of it. And it's pretty cheap and easy to find. It's in the baking section, usually up top. 9 grams or 1.5 teaspoons of salt. 35 grams, or about an eighth of a cup of sugar. It was a little heavy to be an eighth of a cup, but you can use an eighth of a cup and it really won't make that much of a difference. And 35 grams, or a little more than an eighth of a cup of oil. You can use an eighth of a cup. Again, it won't really make much of a difference. So that's your software. For your hardware, you're going to want to have a large vessel. You can use a big Tupperware or a big bowl, anything that can hold material. You don't need to have anything fancy. Or your mixing bowl. If you have a stand mixer that has a hook attachment, more on that in a second. You're also going to want to have one of these things. We call them bench scrapers. They're a baker's best friend. Not only will that help you divide the dough cleanly, but you can also clean up afterwards. If you don't have one of those, you can literally use a butter knife. I've done that before. Some among you might be saying, but Matt, if this is cheap and lazy, why are you using more than 4 ingredients? Because you can make bread with just flour, water, yeast, and salt. I'm adding sugar and oil because A, the sugar is going to make it taste better and brown better, and B, the oil is going to make it softer, so it'll be more like a white bread that most people are used to. Now, you've seen a lot of bread recipes, or you haven't. Either way, some bread recipes will tell you to take your yeast, put it in your water, and mix it up, and then, after like 5 minutes, put in the rest of your ingredients. You don't need to do that, all right? We're lazy here. The only thing that you have to worry about is if the salt and the yeast touch each other. That could kill the yeast. It could also just slow it down, which makes it a lot harder to be lazy. So, this is how I avoid that. I put all of my ingredients, except for water and salt, in one bowl. For those keeping track at home, that's your flour, your yeast, your sugar, and your oil. I just put that all in the big bowl. And then you take your warm water and you put your salt in there and you stir it up. All right? So what you're doing with these 2 steps is you're making sure that your salt and your yeast aren't going to touch by putting your yeast in amongst your flour and your oil and putting your salt dissolved in water. And then you can add your salt water to the rest of your ingredients. Now, for this next step, you're going to want to do 2 things. 1, wash your hands, you nasty mutt. And 2, take off any wedding rings or other rings because they're going to get grody if you don't do that. After you've got your ingredients mixed together in the big bowl, and your dough has come together and it's sticky, but it's not like liquid, it's mostly solid. Put some flour on your counter. I had the flour ready behind me. Have that out and ready before you continue. Flour your counter and dump your dough out and start kneading it. Now, this part you're going to skip if you've got a stand mixer. You're just going to leave your ingredients in the bowl. You don't have to mix them. You just turn your stand mixer on. Either way, go forward to this time to see when your dough should be done. Okay, now for you cheaper, lazier folk, let me explain why kneading the dough on the table saves you money and isn't that difficult to do. So, a stand mixer is expensive, and a lot of bread doughs can actually break your stand mixer. The reason I'm not using my stand mixer is because I tried to make pizza dough once, and it sounded like the little engine that could, and I was like, yeah, I'm not breaking my it's technically my mother-in-law's stand mixer. I'm not breaking my mother-in-law's stand mixer to make pizza. So, I started just kneading all my doughs by hand. And it's not that difficult. I'm going to speed it up, obviously, as you can see. It takes about 10 or 15 minutes, and I don't sweat, okay? It's not like you have to kill it. You're literally just moving it around. Now, if you want to use less flour, or you don't have very much flour, or you'd rather not clean up a floury mess, you can also clean up an oily mess. You can use oil spray, or you can literally like dump a little tiny bit of oil on the table and smear it around, and you can knead with that. That's something else you can do to keep your hands clean. You can spray the oil spray, the cooking spray, on your hands and smear it around, and then knead the dough like that, and just reapply every once in a while once you feel the dough sticking to your hands. And the way that you know that you're done kneading is when you have what's called a window. So that's when you stretch a piece of dough and it stretches out real fine and you can see light through it. So I think right now I'm going to show you my first check and see if it's ready, and you can see it just tears. So I need to go back and knead it more. If you're using a stand mixer, still check every once in a while, see if it's ready. It should take about 5 minutes in a stand mixer. So as you can see, for the laziness factor, it only takes 10 more minutes to knead it by hand. And it saves you hundreds of dollars. Here's my second check. You can see it's starting to do it. It could probably go a little longer, but that's good enough for me. The next step is you take your dough and you take your chopper, as I like to call it, your bench scraper, and you just cut it in half. Now, take a cookie sheet. Just a regular cookie sheet. You don't need a fancy pan. Everybody's got a cookie sheet. They're useful for a bunch of things. And then spray it with oil so that your bread doesn't stick. And roll up your bread dough. Now, I'm going to back up a little bit in the video. You're going to see the cookie sheet disappear. So, when you're rolling bread, it doesn't have to be perfect. But what you're doing is you're kind of making it into a balloon. You're kind of making the outside tight so it holds in the air so that it proves better. Because that's what makes good bread, is having a lot of air inside. That's what the yeast is for. So here I'm going to try to show you a second one slowly, but it's going to end up looking like a peanut, and I'm kind of frustrated by that because when I slow down to try to roll bread, I forget how to use my hands. So do your best. You kind of pound it out on the table. Not pound, but flatten it out on the table. And you fold the bottom up, and you bring the top down, and then you kind of bunch it into itself. And then you roll it so that, like, you've got a seam after that, right? You roll it so the seam's on the bottom, and you use your thumbs to close off that seam. So you're like sealing it, okay? It's kind of like when I was learning how to do it, I thought of it like I was closing a baby diaper up, because that's like the most similar thing I had done to that motion in my life. So, you've got your 2 loaves of bread, they're on your cookie sheet, you sprayed the cookie sheet, you put 2 pieces of plastic, if you're crazy. You watch me do this. I'm just a monster. I'm just ruining this. Oh, pay no attention to the dog in the background. It looks sad, but that's just because I closed off its window so that it couldn't see outside, so that I could film in the kitchen. Anyway, watch me, like, just fumble this piece of plastic. Like, I'm trying to just cover the bread. That's all you gotta do. You're covering it so that the moisture stays inside. Next, you're gonna proof the bread. Now, if this was a fancy bread recipe that was made by someone not trying to be cheap and lazy, they would tell you to put it somewhere to let it rise once before you shape it into loaves, so that it ferments and gets a good flavor in it, and then pound it down and then shape it into loaves, and then let it rise again. But now you've got a 5-hour process on your hands. The way that I'm doing it, it only takes about 3 hours between mixing the ingredients and pulling the bread out of the oven. And I promise you, it will still taste delicious. I live somewhere where it's 90 degrees right now, so I'm going to put my bread out in the garage so that it can proof. You can put your bread, if it's somewhere, like if you're living somewhere where it's cold or you're just trying to make this in the winter, you can put it on top of your stove while your oven preheats, and you're going to preheat that oven to 380 degrees. That's a nice regular temperature to bake bread at, especially a light, fluffy bread like this one. It took mine about 25 to 30 minutes to proof. Yours will most likely take longer, but what you're looking for is for it to look about like this. It'll about double in size. So you're going to bake your bread. I'm going to say start with 15 minutes and then look at it. Essentially what you're looking for is 2 things. 1, you want it to be golden brown and delicious. When it looks like good bread, it's ready. And 2, you want it to sound hollow when you thump it. It's really difficult to burn this bread. If you do burn it at all, it'll just be on the bottom. So don't eat that part, I guess. I've done that before, and you just eat around it, because it's delicious. After you take it out of the oven, let it cool. Then you can cut it. I know that you're going to want to eat it immediately because it'll smell up the whole house real good, but if you wait, it'll be better. And the crumb, which is the size of the holes inside, if you did it right, should look like this. And there you have it. How to make bread if you're cheap and lazy. Thank you very much for watching, and enjoy your bread.